Okay, so here we are in the low Madrone barrel room for the first in our new selection of conversations of a winemaker. We're going to start where we left off in the last selection with Matt Brynildson, the brew master for Firestone Walker Brewery. However, this time we're going to do something a little different. We're going to focus entirely, or pretty much entirely, as focused as we can be, on the anniversary beers, which some of you may know, some of you may not. It's a very interesting subject, and I personally am intrigued to find out where the inspiration came from, etc. So, Matt, thanks for coming back. Cheers. So, the anniversary beer, which is obviously once a year, I believe began with a beer by the name of 10.
That is correct. For our 10th anniversary.
And it's the 10th anniversary of Firestone in general, or Firestone and Paso?
No, Firestone in general. So the partners, Adam Firestone and David Walker, started the brewery down in San Ynez on the Firestone Walker the Firestone winery property. David Walker married Adam's sister Polly, and so the brother-in-laws decided to start a brewery. And that brewery was always, the concept, at least in the beginning, was to do barrel fermented ales. And
Double barrel ale, for
exactly.
example.
So barrels have always been a part of our program, which is very unique for breweries, by the way, especially in the mid-1990s. And
was it unique in days past, or is it an old thing? Is that something old that he was bringing, or they were bringing back, or?
It's old brewery tradition, so as far back as you can imagine, wood barrels, just like in wine, were really the vessel by default. It was the one medium that you could make a watertight vessel.
But more risky for beer than for wine, probably, as far as infection goes, I would think.
Very much so.
Because it's a much more sensitive
it would be
product.
so interesting to step back in history and just see what beers tasted like back in those days when they were using nothing but wood. And, you know, the art was completely different. A great brewer probably knew how to use a barrel, keep it clean, keep beers tasting acceptable. And probably acceptable beer tasted very different than what it does taste now.
I actually learned an interesting thing reading a magazine the other day, and that was the translation of Brettanomyces, which is British fungi, which of course I love that it's called that. But it was a Danish brewer who isolated it out of an ale from England, and that's where it was discovered.
It's plagued beer just like it has plagued wine.
Exactly. It's been a enduring issue for people.
Of course, everything comes full circle, and now brewers are embracing Brettanomyces and making 100% Brettanomyces fermentation.
Which is cool and interesting.
Yeah.
So 10 is more than a 10th anniversary. Wasn't there other things connected to that number? And you're going to do 10 bottles or something?
Well, we were really focusing on that number, right? We're going to do 10 different beers. We're going to release it on 10, 10, 10, and it goes on and on and on.
Right.
But in any case, it was our anniversary, and the partners came to me and said, you know, go ahead and make something special. Now, up until that time, we had really kept the governor on, and we were making double barrel.
Did you not say, that's what I do?
Well, no, because I mean, they were saying in terms of being able to make something that was completely different than what we were making. I mean, we purposefully did not release specialty beers. We didn't release our first IPA until 2007. We didn't have barley wines or Russian Imperial Stouts, as much as the brewers wanted to make them. The original business plan was to really focus in on pale ales, focus in on session beers, and try not to be distracted by doing these kind of what we call extreme beers.
Right.
And
which has become a big segment of the beer market these days.
It's huge now, and I guess if you looked back, someone might say, well, you know, you wasted a lot of time not getting the opportunity to practice those. But I think it really made it perfect for Firestone, for the company, because we got to practice our skills on session beers for years and years and years. And then when we came around to doing extreme beers, we had a system in place, we had brewing procedures in place, and a great team to really execute on those beers. So when 10 came out, I think it was a great beer for how different it was from our normal products, and the fact that we had a brew team that could execute and make something great.
And so in the first can we say, vintage, I suppose, of 10. How many different lots? And let's talk about what lots were in that. I mean, you brought a couple of things, right? So we're drinking cider now, but we should maybe delve into some of the different lots you're talking about, because I mean, let's step back a little bit from that and say, I mean, when I first started this, was you sent me an invite to come and taste with a bunch of other winemakers and help blend the 10, which of course we all jumped on, and it was quite a big room full of people, and I think there was probably 8 or 11 beers or something in front of us. So why winemakers? Why would you want to waste your time with them?
Well, first of all, when they came to us and said, make something special, I got really excited. And I'd always wanted to make barley wine. I'd always wanted to make Russian Imperial Stout. And I had a little bit of exposure to that at Goose Island when I was working in Chicago and in brew pubs and things of this nature, home brewing. But not for years, not on the big scale. So I got really excited, started formulating beers, and started brewing way before time, way before we should have been brewing. And we made a barley wine, we made a Russian Imperial Stout, we made an Imperial Brown Ale, we made all these beers, and then one day realized that we still hadn't figured out which one we wanted, and then the concept
why are we brewing these?
Yeah, and the thought to blend them together, but before that, we needed a place to cellar these beers, and winemakers are used to making these products, putting them in barrels, and then having, this long time and a vessel to age things. In a brewery, typically you have very few stainless steel vessels, and you need to keep them busy and full all the time and turning them to have a successful brewery. So these things couldn't sit in the stainless steel for very long, and so we
probably not that interesting anyway to sit in stainless steel.
No, but we moved them to oak more as much out of necessity as an interesting way to develop the flavors. Now, about that time, we found a friend, Tom Griffin, who you've met probably at some of these blending sessions. Yeah. We call him affectionately the barrel hillbilly or the barrel vagabond, because he seems to know where all of the barrels are at in the spirits industry, and he has access to all these bourbon barrels. And so right about that same time, he showed up on the scene with a truckload of bourbon barrels, and we said, well, gosh, this is a perfect place to put this beer and rest it. So, but back to answering your question, I think that we had all these beers in front of us, and sure, we could start blending them together, but we didn't know anything about blending, or for that matter, taking care of barrels. So I was calling winemakers, yourself, Steve Martell, Matt Trevison, and asking a lot of questions about barrels. And I don't know what exactly was the moment in time, but the light bulb went on, and we said, hey, we should get these guys to help us blend this thing together. And so we had this giant blending session. There were more than a dozen winemakers in the room. We had 10 different beers to work with, and 10 was born.
10, right. And we should emphasize, I think, for people that the bourbon barrels are bourbon barrels that were just emptied bourbon barrels, right? So it's just full of bourbon flavor, pungent. I mean, I bought some from you for my cider, and it's really good fun. I mean, a very different thing than a wine barrel.
Yeah.
The production and use of a bourbon barrel is a very different game than wine barrels. I mean, the charred flavor, and really, really fun.
And, I guess brewers always kind of focus in on sanitation and having something that is devoid of critters, we always say, microbiology, other than our cultured brewing yeast. So a bourbon barrel is perfect because it's had high-proof booze soaked in it for years and years and years. And as long as that thing is handled well after the bourbon is removed, it's essentially this stabilized vessel ready to go. And so... to be honest with you, it's almost like a barrel with training wheels on it for a brewer, because the one thing we don't have to worry about is cleaning this thing and preparing it for
like
process.
In the winery, we use a spray bottle full of vodka to sanitize things. It's like the same thing, right?
Yep.
Certainly couldn't afford to fill one full of vodka.
So we get the advantage of the flavor that's brought, the oak flavor, and we get this nice vessel ready to go.
Cool. Well, let's move on to, let's taste one of these. I love my wife.